There's a particular kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from working too hard or sleeping too little. It comes from caring too much about someone who isn't caring equally back. From thinking about a person constantly, from checking your phone for a message that isn't coming, or replaying a conversation for the 14th time looking for the part where everything went wrong. From making someone else's presence or absence the primary weather system of your inner life. If you know what that feels like, you know how depleting it is. And you've probably also noticed that trying harder doesn't fix it. More effort, more investment, more emotional availability, none of it closes the gap. If anything, it tends to widen it. This is the problem that Stoic philosophy addresses with a directness that feels almost uncomfortable. Not the problem of how to make someone care more, not the problem of how to communicate better or love more effectively. The problem of how to stop handing your peace of mind to something you cannot control, which is, ultimately, the emotional state of another person. Marcus Aurelius spent years writing privately about this, not as a philosopher removed from ordinary human experience, as a man who dealt with betrayal, loss, and the full complexity of close relationships while governing an empire. His insights were not theoretical. They were tested under conditions that would have broken most people. Today we're going through 5 of those insights, not to teach you to stop feeling, not to make you cold or indifferent, but to give you back something you may have been handing over without realizing it. Your own inner stability, independent of what someone else decides to do with theirs. Marcus Aurelius wrote that everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. And when it comes to relationships, one of the most persistent and costly perspectives we carry is the one that says, this connection is permanent. It isn't. Not because people are unreliable or love isn't real, but because nothing is. Every relationship you've ever had has a shape, a beginning, a middle, and at some point, a change. Sometimes that change is gradual, sometimes it's sudden, but the underlying reality is always the same. People move, circumstances shift, emotional investments evolve on different timelines, and connections that felt solid can fade even when nobody did anything particularly wrong. We know this intellectually, we've all experienced it, and yet, most of us still approach our significant relationships as though they're exempt from this rule, as though this person, this connection, is the exception that persists unchanged no matter what else moves. Here's what that belief actually costs you. When you're holding on to someone as if they're permanent, you're not really present with who they are. You're defending the idea of them, the continuity of the connection, the version of them that existed when things were good. And defending an idea of someone is exhausting in a way that being genuinely with someone never is. The Stoic alternative is to accept impermanence not as a depressing fact, but as a liberating one. If you understand that this connection, like all connections, exists within time rather than outside it, you stop fighting to preserve a version of it that's already changing. You start being where you actually are with this person, rather than where you wish things would stay. Marcus Aurelius would put it simply, accept that things end, and you will suffer less when they do. Not because you care less, because you're no longer surprised by the nature of things. There's an image worth sitting with. Imagine holding sand at the beach. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips through your fingers. The palm that holds sand most easily is the one that's open. That same principle applies to every relationship you've ever been in. You don't lose people by holding them lightly. You lose yourself by holding on too tightly. Here's a situation almost everyone has been in. You send a message to someone who matters to you, a friend, a partner, someone you're close to. Hours pass, nothing. The silence that initially felt neutral starts to feel loaded. Your mind, left without information, does what minds do. It fills the gap. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Do they not care the way I thought they did? By the time the silence reaches several hours, you may have constructed an entire emotional crisis around an absence of data. The feeling is completely real. The anxiety, the hurt, the uncertainty. But the story generating those feelings? Entirely fabricated by your own interpretation. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Your emotional state at any given moment is not primarily a response to what's happening. It's a response to what you're telling yourself about what's happening. And those two things can be extraordinarily different. This distinction is one of the most practically important ideas in all of Stoic philosophy because it identifies where your actual leverage is. You cannot control whether someone responds to your message. You cannot control what they feel or how they express it. But you have significant control over the narrative your mind runs in the absence of clear information. The Stoic practice is to apply a simple but rigorous question to the stories your emotions generate. What are the actual facts here, stripped of interpretation? In the message scenario, the fact is that they haven't responded. Everything else, the meaning you've attached to that, the fears it's activated, the conclusions you've drawn about what it implies, is your construction, not reality. This doesn't mean dismissing your feelings. Your feelings are real and they deserve attention. What it means is that you stop treating your interpretation of an event as though it's the event itself. You examine the story before you build your emotional response on top of it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we have power over our minds, not over outside events. Most people read this as advice about resilience in difficult circumstances, but it applies just as directly to the emotional weather we create around ambiguous ones. The silence of someone you care about can be almost anything. The catastrophe your mind turns it into is always your choice, whether or not it feels like one. The next time you feel an emotional storm building, pause before you follow it. Ask, what do I actually know? What am I adding to what I know? And what would change if I waited for information before deciding how to feel?
Negative visualization is probably the Stoic practice that sounds worst in summary and works best in practice. The basic idea: deliberately imagine losing something or someone you care about. Picture it clearly. Let yourself feel the discomfort of that imagined loss. Sit with it. Why would anyone do this on purpose? Because the Stoics discovered something that modern psychology has since confirmed. The emotional impact of loss is significantly reduced when you've already mentally visited it. Not because you've become numb to it, but because you've removed the component that makes loss most devastating, which is surprise. When something ends that you genuinely believed would last forever, you're dealing with two simultaneous shocks: the loss itself and the violation of your expectations about reality. Both of those take emotional energy to process. Negative visualization doesn't prevent the loss, but it absorbs the second shock in advance, in controlled conditions, so that when reality arrives, you're only managing one thing instead of two. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not disturb yourself by imagining your life's troubles all at once. Rather, as each arises, meet it with calmness and self-control." This is the spirit of the practice, not dwelling on worst cases obsessively, but building the mental familiarity with loss that allows you to meet it calmly when it comes. Here's what this looks like practically. Think about someone whose presence in your life you've taken somewhat for granted. A close friend, a family member, a partner. Now actually imagine in some detail what your daily life would look like without them. Not forever, not as a morbid exercise, just as a genuine mental visit to what their absence would feel like. If you do this honestly, two things tend to happen. First, discomfort. The exercise works precisely because it's uncomfortable. Second, and more importantly, you realize in a new way that you actually have this person, right now, today. That their presence in your life is not owed to you, not guaranteed, not a background condition of existence. It's something real and specific that you have right now and won't always have. That realization tends to shift how you engage with people. You stop arguing about small things as though the relationship is indestructible. You stop postponing the expression of care as though there's unlimited time. You start treating what you have as the gift it actually is, rather than as the backdrop you've stopped noticing. And when loss does come, as it does for everyone, in every relationship, eventually, you find that you have some internal preparation. The grief is still real,
but you're not simultaneously processing the grief and the shock that something you believed was permanent turned out not to be. That preparation isn't pessimism, it's clarity. And it's one of the most genuinely compassionate things you can do for your future self.
Here's a question worth asking yourself honestly. Think of a relationship in your life, past or present, where you were working hardest to maintain the connection. Maybe a friendship that was fading, a romantic relationship that felt unstable, a family dynamic that required constant management. In that relationship, how much of your energy was going toward things within your control? Your own behavior, your honesty, the quality of what you brought, and how much was going toward things that were never yours to control? Their feelings, their choices, whether they were going to respond the way you needed them to. For most people, in relationships where emotional attachment is highest, the answer is uncomfortably skewed toward the second category. We try to influence other people's emotional states toward us because it feels like the most important variable. If they care about us the right amount, in the right way, everything else works out. And that might be true, but their feelings are not accessible to you. You can inform them, you can invite them, you can create conditions that might make them more likely, but you cannot produce them directly. And trying to do so is one of the most exhausting things a human being can sustain. Epictetus divided the world into two categories with a precision that has never been improved upon: things within our power and things not within our power. Within our power, our thoughts, our choices, our actions, our responses. Outside our power, everything else, including, crucially, how other people feel about us. This isn't a counsel of indifference. You're not being told not to care. You're being told to stop spending your energy on a domain where your effort produces nothing. Because effort applied to the uncontrollable doesn't just fail to change things, it costs you the energy you would have had for things that actually respond to your effort. The shift the Stoics are pointing toward is called emotional autonomy. The idea that your inner stability, your sense of worth, your peace, your sense of being okay, is not legitimately dependent on someone else's emotional state. That you can care about people deeply without making your well-being hostage to their choices. This is harder than it sounds. Most of us were taught, directly or by example, that love means your happiness is bound up in someone else's. That caring means being affected by what they do and don't do. And there's a version of that which is healthy. Genuine care does involve genuine vulnerability. But there's another version, the version where someone's mood determines your day, where their withdrawal sends you into anxiety, where their approval is the primary input your self-worth runs on. That is not love. It's dependency. And dependency, however warm it feels in good moments, leaves you fundamentally unstable because it makes your inner life contingent on something external. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The obstacle in emotional detachment is almost always this: the belief that if I stop trying to control this, I'll lose it. That if I stop managing their feelings, they'll drift. That if I claim my own stability independent of them, I'll have nothing left. The Stoic reality is the opposite. The person who stops grasping often finds that what was worth keeping stays, and what leaves reveals itself as something that was only staying because of the grasping. Either way, you gain something essential. Either you keep the connection, but now from a place of genuine security rather than anxious management, or you lose the connection and find that you're okay, which turns out to be the most important thing you could possibly discover. Your worth is not something another person can give you or take away. It's not determined by whether they text back, whether they show up, or whether they love you the way you love them. You can choose to experience it that way, but it was always an error in where you place the source. Here's a question that sounds simple and lands hard. Will this matter in 5 years? Not as a dismissal of what you're feeling right now. What you're feeling right now is real and it deserves to be taken seriously, but as a genuine inquiry into proportion, because one of the most reliable features of emotional pain inside relationships is that it distorts scale.
It makes the immediate feel ultimate. It makes the temporary feel permanent. It makes this person, this connection, this specific rupture feel like the defining fact of your entire existence. And almost always, not sometimes, almost always, that sense of proportion is wrong. Marcus Aurelius returned to this practice repeatedly. He would deliberately extend his time horizon, not just to next year, but to decades, to generations, to the vast sweep of time in which individual human dramas are extraordinarily small. He did this not to minimize his own experience, but to restore perspective that the immediate moment had distorted. Think about your own history with this. Think about a relationship or a loss that, at the time it happened, felt like it might actually break something fundamental in you. The breakup that seemed like it would hollow out your life permanently. The friendship that ended and left you genuinely wondering who you were without it. The rejection that felt like it confirmed every bad thing you'd ever believed about yourself. Where is that now? If you're honest, it's a chapter, a part of the story that shaped you, perhaps significantly, but not the whole story, not the verdict on your life. Evidence, if you look at it clearly, that you survived what felt unsurvivable, that you continued to be yourself, changed perhaps, but intact, through something that seemed like it would end you. That isn't just consolation, it's actual information about your resilience. Information that is directly applicable to whatever you're carrying right now. The Stoic practice of zooming out doesn't ask you to pretend you're not hurting. It asks you to hold the hurt in a larger frame, the frame of your whole life, which is richer and more various and more capable of absorbing difficulty than the current moment makes it feel. When you're entangled in the emotions of a particular relationship, it's very easy to unconsciously make that person the center of your universe. Your happiness, your sense of direction, your sense of who you are, all organized around their presence or absence. But you are not a satellite orbiting another person. You are the main character of your own story. They were part of your story, maybe a significant part, but not the whole of it. Emotional detachment at this level is not about caring less about people. It's about caring more accurately about your own life, about the full scope of it, the full length of it, the full range of what it has contained and will contain beyond this specific chapter. You have survived every difficult thing that has happened to you so far. The score on that metric is perfect. Whatever you're holding right now is going somewhere. Not nowhere, but somewhere. It's going to become part of the story rather than the whole of it. And that is not just something to be consoled by. It's something to be genuinely strengthened by. Because it means the stability you're looking for, the peace that doesn't depend on any particular person doing any particular thing, is already inside the person you've been building through every difficulty you've ever navigated. You just have to stop looking for it outside yourself to find it. 5 principles. 5 different angles on the same fundamental truth. Emotional detachment isn't coldness. It isn't the decision to stop caring or to build walls between yourself and the people in your life. It's something considerably more difficult and considerably more valuable than either of those things. It's the practice of caring without losing yourself in the caring, of being genuinely present in relationships without making your inner stability contingent on their outcome, of loving people fully, honestly, with real vulnerability, while understanding that your peace cannot be outsourced to their choices. Marcus Aurelius spent his life trying to live this way in conditions that would make most modern difficulties look manageable. He didn't always succeed, his journals make that clear, but he kept returning to these principles, kept examining where he'd given away his equanimity and taking it back, kept asking himself whether his inner life was genuinely his or whether he'd handed it to something external without noticing. That question is available to you right now about any relationship, any attachment, any person whose emotional state you've allowed to become the primary regulator of your own. Do your emotions control you, or do you control your emotions? The answer, as always, is a practice. Daily, imperfect, entirely worth it.